Well, hi everybody, it's Mrs. Perryman, and today we're going to be talking about fish. And so I've got a little picture here I wanted to share with you. This is all of the market forms of fish. And so there's different kinds. These are called round fish. And then I've got one that's called a flat fish. Let me see if I can find that, like a flounder. Would be an example of a flat fish. But these fish like this, whenever they're sold in a market, you can buy them like in a fillet, or if they're bigger fish, sometimes you'll see them as steaks. Okay, so sometimes you'll see them dressed. Sometimes you'll see it just cut in sticks. So there's several different ways that you might be able to buy fish. Most often, whenever we buy them, they're frozen, and generally they do not have the head still attached. Usually the fins, they've been cleaned the inside. In fact, I think almost always they've been gutted. And so if you buy fresh fish, sometimes, well, they will be gutted. Occasionally you'll get fresh fish that still have the head attached. And if you do that, you want to make sure that the eyes are really clear. That way you know it is very fresh. So fish has a pretty short shelf life. So that's why we get them, generally speaking, frozen. Okay. So here's your different classifications. That's kind of hard to read there, but the flatfish, like flounder and sole and halibut, those are those fish that are flat. They have, their eyes are on both sides, so that whenever they kind of bury themselves in the sand, they can see if there's predators coming around. The round fish have eyes on both sides. And then things like mollusks, those are going to be oysters and clams and mussels that have a hard shell, and that shell is hinged. And then crustaceans will be like lobsters and shrimps and crabs. So you guys can kind of picture those in your mind there. Okay, here's another kind of a little diagram here. So you'll see fish, if it's drawn, that just means that the guts are removed. If it's dressed, you'll see the fins and the head and the tail removed. And again, the steaks, those are cut into slices, and then the fillets are each side lengthwise. Okay. All right. So, here we are again. Okay, so let's see what else we got here. Where did it go here? Oh, I was going to show you, this is a famous fish recipe, and this is called bouillabaisse, and that's kind of a funny word, but it just really means fish stew. And this is like fisherman's stew. And so the fishermen, after they've been out fishing all day or all morning, I'd say, they come into the port, and a lot of fishermen just sell the fish they've caught right off their boat or right there on the dock. Usually, at the end of the day, if they have fish left, that's what they take home and have for their dinner. And that's where bouillabaisse came from. And bouillabaisse, whenever you get around some of these coastal areas, you'll see this. It's actually French. But you'll see it a lot in the French Cajun area around Louisiana and around the Gulf Coast, of course. But it has, this particular recipe has lots of different kinds of fish. This one has mussels, which are, of course, the hinged mollusks, and then it has fresh fish. Now, this type of fish, ocean fish like grouper or bass, these are a pretty dense meat, much denser than say like a crappie like you'd catch in Grand Lake. So the meat on this is much more, maybe more beefy in texture than typical like a flaky type fish that you might think of. So whenever you cut that up or chunk it up, whenever you cook it in the broth, if it was really flaky, like say a bass or crappie, like what we would catch in the lake, it would just disintegrate or fall apart. Whereas this type of fish has a little bit more fat and just a heavier meat that doesn't fall apart. Okay, it has things like garlic, onions, those Italian tomato, Roma tomatoes, okay, clam juice. This one also has crab and shrimp in it, so it's got all kinds of stuff in it. Pretty tasty stuff. So if you ever get a chance to try bouillabaisse, I would encourage you to do it because it is quite delicious. Okay. Let's see if I can find your, there's what I want. There it is. Okay, so here is our slideshow for today. So fish and shellfish, see right here, this is a round fish right here. And these are shrimp, and these are probably some type of scallop right here. And all kinds of different types of sea creatures that are tasty to eat. Yes, Anthony?
I don't see anything. I still see the ingredients, the recipe. There we go. I see it now.
Okay, well, thanks for letting me know, Anthony. Okay, so this right here, like I said before, is the round fish. And we've got some shrimp. These are scallops down here. Okay, so fish, you know, is kind of a specialty type thing when you think about the kinds of restaurants that we have here, kind of in the middle of the United States. You know, we're not really near an ocean, and so everything that ocean type fish like this is expensive if it comes in fresh, because it's got to be overnighted. But we do have access to things like shrimp and salmon and things like that we get that are frozen, which is pretty common and easily accessible at the grocery store. One thing we do need to remember about fish is that it is a potentially hazardous food, meaning that we do have to handle it properly, keep it refrigerated or frozen, as the case may be. But it does have lots of interesting flavors. Some folks may have allergies to either shellfish or shrimps or crabs, scallops, something like that. And so you have to be very careful that you let people know what is in the food that you're cooking them, because these could be some potential allergens. Okay, I had shrimp for dinner last night. I made a kind of a stir fry, and I used zucchini, and I made zoodles out of zucchini with my little handheld little crank slicer, and made noodles out of that, and then had some garlic and some olive oil and a little white wine, and made a nice sauce for it, and then had my shrimp in there. It was a pretty tasty dinner. So you can do all kinds of stuff with fish, and most of the time fish is light tasting, and the meat is fairly light, so you can do a lot of really interesting things with fish and shellfish. Okay, they're not, we talked about with beef, the USDA inspects those processing plants. With shellfish, inspections are not required by law. So there is an inspection that some folks that sell shellfish use just to make their product look a little bit better, and that is called PUFI, P-U-F-I. Okay, and that's what that stamp looks like there. Okay, so when you buy fresh fish, now there are a couple of fish markets. I bought some fresh fish Actually, in Tulsa, there's a couple of really nice fish markets. Whenever you go in there, it should not smell like a fish market. It should not smell bad. It should not offend your nose. So fish should smell like the ocean. They should not smell bad. Okay. So clear eyes, red gills if the head's still attached. If you buy, sometimes you can buy live crab and live lobster, and they should be just that. They should be moving around whenever you touch them. The oysters, clams, and things like that, if they're open, that means they're dead. So if you tap them and they don't close up, then you don't want to eat those. Okay, and shellfish are purchased live. Now you can buy like canned clams and things like that, which you certainly could do if you purchase them live. Like I said, you need to make sure that they are live. Now these on the shellfish, they do have to be tagged. Like whenever you buy them, they will come in like a net kind of a bag. And there has to be a shellfish tag attached to that bag, and it has some identifying things on there, such as the company that is providing those shellfish, and it will have some numbers that identify where they were harvested at. One of the reasons why is because certain times of the year there are algae floats, and some of those algae floats that are out there are toxic to human, and so we have to be careful with that. Some other things that happen would be maybe like pollution, things like that could be causing, if we ate the shellfish, to make us sick as humans. You know, some shellfish, like oysters, sometimes are eaten raw, like oysters on the half shell. And so anything that's in that water is obviously going to be in the meat of that particular shellfish. So we want to make sure that what we are consuming is safe to do so. And that's why we have those tag requirements. As a restaurant or a seller of those things, you have to keep those tags on hand for 90 days after the sale of that particular shellfish. So in case there's a problem, you can go back and we can trace where those came from. Okay, fish, like we were just talking about before, there are two basic categories. There's fin fish and there's shellfish. Okay, and then within those two categories, there are subcategories. So within the fin fish, there's flat and round fish. And with the shellfish, there's mollusks and crustaceans. Okay, so let's go back to talk about fin fish. Again, that flat fish is going to be like a flounder. And then the round fish will just be one that is like a normal fish that you would picture. Shellfish, you can have mollusks, which would be with the shells on both sides, or a crustacean is something like a lobster or shrimp. Okay. All right. So here's a few more pictures here. The flatfish, flounder, and if you guys remember your Little Mermaid story, flounder. If you remember flounder, he was kind of a flatfish, and he would get on the bottom of the ocean and kind of wiggle until he kind of put sand on top of himself, and that's kind of their defense mechanism. And halibut is the same kind of fish. They're both really big fish, and so pretty interesting to look at. Halibut is one of my favorites. It has a beautiful white, meaty texture, and is lovely to grill or cook in a pan or roast. And it's lovely in that bouillabaisse we were talking about, although it's just a little bit expensive for something like that, but it sure is good. The round fish, and some of these are not gigantic, and some of these are colossal in size, like a shark or maybe a tuna. Those would all be gigantic. Salmon is a pretty good size fish, but not as big as a shark or a tuna. Some of these will have some of them range from white meat Salmon, as you know, is kind of an orangey peachy color. Some of the like shark and tuna sometimes will be kind of a pink color. And so it's very interesting, all of the different shapes and kinds of fish that are available to us. And they all have many different textures. There's lots of different price points whenever you're looking at these. Cod and sea bass and things like that. Snapper are relatively inexpensive, whereas shark and tuna are going to be much more expensive. Your shell type mollusks, it just kind of depends on where you are in the country. You know, availability is going to affect the price quite a bit. When we go down to the coast, it's real easy to get shrimp and oysters and things like that just at the dock, or just locally in the grocery stores, and it's not as expensive as it is here. So it's again a part of the area of the country determines the price. Okay. All right, and one more time, here's those market forms of fish. So these are the ways that you can buy fish for your food service operation. So just a whole, plain old whole fish, which we don't see real often. More frequently, we might see one that is drawn, which just means that it's had the guts removed. If it's dressed, that means the guts are removed, the scales are removed, and the fins are removed. And again, that steak is that cross-section cut, usually from a bigger fish. And then the fillets, those are those side cuts that are from head to tail. Okay. As I told you before, fish is a potentially hazardous food, which means that we need to control how it is held. And so it needs to be at the very least refrigerated 41 or frozen. Okay, sometimes you'll see in markets it will be laid out on top of fish, or on top of ice, I mean, and that's a good way to keep that cold. Okay. Fabrication. So sometimes, like I said, you can buy fish in fillets, or you can buy them in steaks. It just depends on what fish it is. Okay, mollusks and crustaceans. So mollusks have the shells on both sides, and they don't have any internal skeleton. It's just they're just kind of jiggly inside, but that hard outer shell is what protects it. And crustaceans, like this lobster here, it has a hard outer shell that protects all of the soft inside. So it actually has its bone structure, or what we would call its body armor on the outside. Okay, shucking is the term that's referred to whenever you are removing the meat from the inside of shell type seafood, such as oysters and clams. Okay, and you want to make sure that the shell is clean before you pop that open. Kind of brush it off really good, and as you pop it, you use a special oyster shucking knife that's kind of got a point but fairly dull, and you jam that in there and give it a twist, and it pops it open. And make sure that we get the sand out of them, and any crumbled shell, because nobody would want to eat that. So you just have to be conscious of that whenever you're shucking these. Here's a lobster. Frequently you'll see lobster that is steamed. Sometimes you'll see it grilled. They start out and they're kind of a rusty red, and then once they're cooked, they turn kind of a bright red color. The part that is the most edible is this claw part here. It has some really nice meat here. And then back in here in this tail, what is up here is all kind of guts and miscellaneous, which is and lungs, which to me is not very edible. Okay, shrimp, yum. Down the back of this shrimp, there is a vein that is full of usually sand and all kinds of stuff. So we want to make sure that we remove that. That's called deveining. Shrimp is sold by how many pieces are in a pound. So the lower the number, the larger the shrimp. So, and there's lots of different sizes of shrimp. Some of them are really big and some of them are a little tiny. And there's lots of different ways to prepare shrimp. They're great just about any way. Okay, here's some exotic seafood that we may not see very often, like sea urchin. Now you might see squid out there in the form of calamari, for instance. You probably have seen that at a local restaurant. Every once in a while, you'll see octopus on the menu, and sometimes you'll see eel. You'll see that turn up. I had one time I'd gone to a Chinese restaurant, and they had it in some. Actually, it was like a sushi place, and they had eel as one of the sushi rolls, and it was quite tasty. So some of them will have some specialty techniques that, as far as fabricating them, like these sea urchins here, what is edible is on the inside. On the octopus, it's just the little leg tentacles that is edible. Sometimes they'll have things that will stick you or poke you, and so sometimes you have to wear protective gloves. So there's all kinds of things that are specific to different kinds of sea animals to get those on the plate. So pretty interesting to check that out. Okay, shrimp. So I like this, trust your nose and your eyes. So they should be bright and have a kind of a shine to them and feel firm. If they smell like ammonia or rotten eggs or even chlorine bleach, that would be an indicator of a no-go. Okay. Sometimes I have seen shrimp that we buy that is frozen, and it will have kind of a yellow color to it, and that is sodium bisulfate, which is a preservative. And so we want to make sure that it doesn't have that yellow color to it. So to be really careful with that whenever you're buying shrimp. Sometimes you'll see trucks around that are selling fresh shrimp or meat, and always be on your guard whenever you're buying things like that. Make sure that they, if they're selling out of a roadside stand, make sure that they have the city, most places like that have to buy a city permit to be able to sell those things. So you want to make sure that they have that so that you can trust that the food that they're selling is as it should be. Okay, and here's what I was talking about. The numbers tell you how many shrimp are in a pound. And so like right here, if there's 110 shrimp in the pound, those are tiny. Whereas down here, if you got 12 to 15 shrimp in a pound, those are pretty good size. And then look down here, if you have 10 or less in a pound, those are called colossal. So anyway, I thought that was kind of a funny analogy there on the size. So I have yet to get your things out on Moodle, but you'll have some questions from your book in chapter 18, and I'll get those out on Moodle here pretty soon. And so just have a few questions and a couple of vocab words that we'll be working on. And so that's about all I have for you today. So tomorrow, if you'll check back on Moodle, you can have a look at those questions and get those ready for me. And otherwise, I hope you have a super great day, and we'll talk soon.